I'd like to start the day by just doing some network basic stuff, right? So you guys probably know this already, and forgive me for doing it, but I thought it would be worthwhile just going over basic IP addressing stuff, basic Mac learning and stuff like that on a network, so that we can understand fundamentally how that stuff works. That's not Ruckus specific, it's just, here's some good networking info that might help you. And then I'll introduce Adam in a moment, but he's going to run us through some Wi-Fi stuff. Then we're going to talk about Ruckus access point setup. We'll do some hands-on with the AP. We're going to dive into Smart Zone. And then this afternoon, I think the most interesting stuff will come for you guys, which is when we start to talk about the security aspect of things. And then we'll talk a little bit about what the guys at Network for Learning are doing with their secure access program as part of the ministry's Tuhono rollout. So disclaimer, I'm not Network for Learning. I do not work for Network for Learning. The information that I will share with you is, I have a close relationship with them, but the information I will share with you is going to be Ruckus product specific. But roughly I can give you some guidance as to how it will work. But the final configuration will rest with them. And speaking of education, so I guess this is one of the reasons that we're here today and to talk about what's going on as well. And so this is the Ministry of Education's Tuhono program. This program is actually made up of 3 different stages. So they have what they call equipment support extension, then they have network hardware replacement, and then they have what they call secure access. And now there are 3 phases to this rollout. The purpose of the first phase, the network support extension, is because there is not enough hardware available right now and not enough resources available to upgrade Wi-Fi in every single school immediately. The program for the upgrade of schools as part of this program, it generally centers around your 5 to 6 year anniversary of the SNUP upgrade or the wireless SNUP that was completed in schools. The program timeline is defined by the team at Ministry of Education. They're the people who decide which schools are coming up for hardware refresh and when, and then they give that information to Network for Learning to make it happen. To the best of my knowledge, that's how the program works. But at Ruckus, we're really happy that we signed a contract with Ministry of Education. The program's been running for about 18 months. Over a 5-year period for this program, we expect to deploy almost 40,000 access points around schools in New Zealand and almost 10,000 switches. It's, I think, the first time in New Zealand that somebody has selected the same switch and Wi-Fi vendor. And it's a great story. As you'll see today, we have centralized management, which gives you the ability to manage the switches and the access points from the same management platform. So there's a lot of advantage that can be gained from that. So completion date around about 2024 for the program. At this point in time, we do have some limitations in terms of equipment availability because of the COVID pandemic in terms of getting equipment supply. We currently have about 3,000 access points at the Dicker Data Warehouse in Auckland, so access points are not a problem. Switches, however, are a problem for us right now. There's about 300 switches in country at the distributor, and we are expecting a couple of months delay on the switches. Any quick questions around that? Any comments? Is anyone working in a school that has been through the process of having been up? Yep, you guys? Yep, okay, cool. So, I think to date, there's been about 600 schools completed as part of the upgrade, and out of 2,500 schools. So there's still a ways to go. So if you're a school, you'll be contacted by Network for Learning at some point in time by their account manager, and they will ask you to review some documentation and sign up to the program. There's another piece of the program, which is the secure access, which we'll talk about towards the end of the day, which is about making sure that everybody is authenticating to the network and adding additional layer of security on the wired network as well. And we'll talk about that towards the end of the day. So at CommScope Ruckus, we have indoor products, outdoor products, and we also have specialty products. When I talk about a specialty product, we're talking about something like this. This is a wall plate access point, really popular in hotels. So if you've been into a hotel that has Ruckus recently, you might see one of these on the wall. It's basically a 2x2 Wi-Fi access point, and then on the bottom, so the Ethernet cable plugs into the back, and on the bottom we have 2 Ethernet ports. So some of them plug like a VoIP phone into one of them or a TV into the other one. Really great solution for like a small home office or for a hotel room. It's designed to fit over a standard, PowerPoint flush box type thing. So yeah, that's the access point lineup. Then we've got the switches, and we're going to talk about the switches in a lot more detail. So if you've been in IT for long enough, you may remember a company called Foundry Networks. Foundry Networks had a product. It was the fast iron series of switches. So Foundry Networks had like big iron, fast iron, all sorts of irons. I don't know, they had this medieval theme going on. And then Foundry Networks was acquired by a company called Brocade. And then it was the Brocade ICX campus switch. And then Brocade was acquired by a company called Broadcom, who didn't want the ICX switching technology. And so that technology went to Ruckus. And so at Ruckus, we now have the ICX Ruckus switching portfolio. So this is a switch family with a long history. It's a product that's been around for a number of years. We've continued to improve the portfolio, and we'll go into that in a bit more detail a bit later. And then we're going to go into the controllers in a lot more detail as well. And so, like a lot of schools probably have a zone director controller sitting in your rack today, and we'll talk about that in a moment. We also now have the option to run a virtualized controller or a cloud-hosted controller, and we're going to go into that in a lot more detail. We also have a thing called Ruckus Cloud. Probably I would suggest not very suitable for New Zealand schools, mainly because the feature set is not as extensive as you would be used to inside of Zone Director and Smart Zone, which we'll talk about. And Ruckus Cloud requires a per access point annual subscription. So the retail cost on that is about $100 per access point per year. And that gives you Ruckus Cloud, 100% cloud hosted by Ruckus. Great for small businesses who have lots of different branch offices all over the place because they can centrally manage things via Ruckus Cloud. But if you're a large campus environment, then potentially Ruckus Cloud might not be the best fit, which is why we have the other solutions. I'll talk about this in a moment, but the thing to note is that a Ruckus access point can work on any of these solutions. So like, for example, if you buy an R600, R610 access point, it will work on Zone Director, it will work on Ruckus Cloud, it will work on Smart Zone, and it will work on a thing we have called Unleashed. And I'll talk about that in a moment. And so the Ruckus Beamflex antenna is built into every product. It just works. And so we would estimate that if you were in like a warehousing logistics situation where bandwidth wasn't your primary concern, coverage was your primary concern, then you probably need 30% less Ruckus access points compared to another vendor. And that's because of the antenna technology. It sends the signal further. If you're indoors in a school or something like that, it's a bandwidth game, right? It's not about how far does the signal go, it's about how much bandwidth and how much speed can we squeeze out of it. And in that situation, the Beamflex antenna also provides advantage because stronger signal equals faster data rates as well. And faster data rates means we can get people on and off the network quicker, meaning that there's more overall bandwidth for everybody. So here's a graphic that explains how the Beamflex antenna works. It's a pretty simple graphic. But if an access point was talking to a bunch of devices and I pick up my laptop and I move to another room, the access point electrically steers its antenna in the other direction. So the Beamflex system is this marriage of this hardware antenna array and this software. The software is working on a per packet basis. So if you send out a ping on a network, that's a packet. So every packet that goes out, the access point does analysis and it works out which direction it should send that packet of data. And it does this based on a learning algorithm that takes feedback from the last packet we sent. So we'll send a piece of information. If we get back 50% signal, then we'll try a different antenna element. And then we'll go, okay, we'll try over here. If that was only 10% signal, we'll go back. But if it was better, then we'll continue to use the other path. So what you'll notice when you're talking to a Ruckus access point is the first kind of 5 to 10 packets of data might be a bit slow, but after that, the learning has taken place and things get quite fast. And this is on a per client basis. So we have a table, and it's got the MAC address of the client, the signal strength, and the antenna element that we're using. And the AP keeps track of every single MAC address that's attached to it and keeps the antenna data for every MAC address. All right, so let's talk about the controllers for a moment. And so I know that a lot of people in the room probably have a Zone Director controller in their environment or know what one is or have seen one. And so I have a slide coming up later, but there are essentially two versions of Zone Director that are currently in circulation. There's the Zone Director 3000 and the Zone Director 1200. And the Zone Director is okay, but to be completely honest, we are end of sailing that product. I think as of today, you can buy a Zone Director 1200. The 3000 is end of sale now. The 1200 I think is still available, but it won't be available for much longer. I think another 6 months and then it will be cut off. You won't be able to buy it anymore. And so moving forward, what we're looking to do is push everybody to our virtualized controller, which is called the Ruckus Smart Zone. So I'll talk about this more shortly, but the Ruckus Smart Zone is what Network for Learning are using for all of the schools. The Smart Zone can scale to 30,000 access points for a cluster, and it's made up of 4 nodes in a cluster, so 4 VMs, and we'll talk about that a bit later. So that's the Smart Zone. It's suitable for like an enterprise even, so you could use it even if you've got like less than 100 access points in your school. You could run up a VM and that can be your controller. You can use it locally on site if you want. Also, the other thing to keep in mind is that the architecture of the Smart Zone platform is quite a bit different to the Zone Director. The Zone Director platform is a traditional wireless LAN controller that operates what they call a split MAC architecture. So on the Zone Director, a lot of the functions like authenticating a Wi-Fi client and things like that, it's all done on the controller. If the controller is not available, then your Wi-Fi effectively stops working with Zone Director. With Smart Zone, it's a completely different world. So what we've done is we've rewritten the access point code, and it's basically the access points are autonomous with the Smart Zone system. The Smart Zone really just provides management and control functions down to the access point, which means that if the access point is unable to reach the Smart Zone in the cloud or on site, it will continue to function. The access point can talk directly to your Radius server and continue to authenticate users at a local level, even if the cloud-based controller has gone. And there are a bunch of other things that are also continue to function at a local level. And so that's the difference between the Smart Zone and the Zone Director platform. I don't think I'm going to talk about Ruckus Cloud. As I explained, it's a per access point subscription. The other thing we will talk about real quick though is Ruckus Unleashed. And so if you have a small site, when I say small, Unleashed actually supports up to 128 access points. So if you've got a small site with not more than 128 APs, and it has to be a single site, you can basically change the firmware on an access point. And you can load Ruckus Unleashed firmware onto an access point, and you can turn one of the access points into a controller. And to be completely honest, Unleashed is based on the Zone Director code base, so you get all the same features that you would get on Zone Director. It's a slightly different GUI, but yeah, up to 128 access points and 8 switches can be managed from an Unleashed solution. No licenses as well, which is great. There's a support cost, it's pretty small. With Smart Zone and Zone Director and the other platforms, you need to have a license for each device that connects. But with Unleashed, it's 128 access points, no license, which is pretty neat. So a lot of people are recycling Ruckus access points as they come out of schools, loading up Unleashed, and then using it for amazing Wi-Fi at home. That's absolutely something that could happen. R600 and upwards. Any of the R series, not the ZF7982 series though. Has to be an R series. Yeah. And Unleashed firmware can be downloaded from our Ruckus support website free of charge. So you can get up and running if you find some hardware. There's also an app, so you can remotely manage Unleashed via an app as well, which is kind of cool. All right, touch on the switches real quick. So this is the ICX switch family. Couple of highlights around the switches. So the first thing is stacking with the ICX switches is not done using an HDMI cable. It's done using an SFP Plus cable, which means it can be an optical stack. So you can literally use fiber to form the stack, or you can use a DAC or a twin-X cable, whatever you like to call it. And they typically come in 1, 3, and 5 meter lengths. And so all the stacking is done using the 10 gigabit SFP plus port that you see on the side. We can stack a 12 port with a 24 port and a 48 port. Could all be members of the same stack. It doesn't have to be the same port count, which is kind of neat. So that's stacking. These switches are also layer 3 capable. So all of these switches, including the 12 port switch that we have here, can be a full layer 3 switch. You can have up to 128 layer 3 interfaces, and this 12 port switch will do routing, and also, if you want, dynamic routing protocols for 128 layer 3 interfaces. It can be a DHCP server, can do a whole bunch of stuff. And that's all on a basic 12 port switch. And so the switches have two firmware images. They have a layer 2 image and a layer 3 image. Both available free of charge. You can download from the support site, and you can change the firmware image that runs on your switches quite easily. As part of the deployment that N4L are doing, they'll run the layer 2 firmware on all switches, but sometimes if you want to do layer 3 routing on the core, they'll upgrade the core to the layer 3 firmware. Excellent. And the switches are all managed using the SmartZone controller, or you obviously have CLI on each individual switch, and there's a web UI on the switch as well.
So can you realistically have a distributed core, say, across 6 buildings, for example?
Yeah, if you wanted. So there's a number of different technologies you can use to achieve that. If you really wanted to, we support long distance stacking. So we can do stack members can literally be 10 kilometers apart connected by fiber. I probably wouldn't go for that architecture though, because in my opinion, if you have a stack, it should be in the same cabinet so you know what's going on. But you know, each to their own, you could do whatever you want. There are other pieces of technology we have as well, such as this thing called Campus Fabric, which we don't recommend either. I'll explain that a bit later on. But yeah, there's some other things you can use to manage your switches efficiently.